Hey, gorgeous. Welcome to the Ready to Bloom podcast, which features interviews with inspiring women entrepreneurs from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, without further ado, I'll hand you over to your host, Holly Worton.
Hello and welcome to the Ready to Bloom podcast, episode 100. Woohoo! I'm really excited about today's episode. What we're going to do today is a solo episode where I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on, what we've covered in the last 99 episodes, and what my plans are for the future. So thank you so much for tuning in today. We're also going to talk a little bit about lessons I've learned along the way and how you can start your own podcast, because this is one of the most common questions I seem to be getting lately from people. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we're going to get started. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about the story behind the podcast, because I know that listenership has grown over the last 2 years and not everyone has been with me from the beginning. So why did I start this podcast? Well, I started out listening to podcasts just as I was, walking around town or going to the gym, and I started looking for podcasts that interviewed women entrepreneurs. And someone had recommended The Suitcase Entrepreneur with Natalie Sisson. And that was the first podcast I really started listening to. Absolutely love Natalie's podcast and listened to it every day until I got caught up with all of the episodes that were present to that date and continued to listen to it. And I really, really liked it. But one of the things that I wanted was a podcast that just interviewed women entrepreneurs, because Natalie interviews a mix of both men and women. So I started looking for what I wanted. Couldn't find anything. I started asking online and Facebook groups that I belonged to, and no one could recommend anything to me. I couldn't find what I wanted, so I decided the best thing to do would be to just start my own podcast. That way, I could provide to everyone else this thing that I was looking for. The interesting thing is that hundreds of other women seem to do the same thing at the same time. There were so many women entrepreneurs starting podcasts, interviewing other women entrepreneurs about the same time. Now, I first had the idea for this podcast, I think it was May of 2013, and I launched my first episodes in August. So it took me about 3 months to learn how to create a podcast, learn everything that I needed to know, plan the frequency, get an idea of who I wanted to start interviewing, interview those people, get the episodes edited and set up and ready to go online. That took about 3 months. I probably could have done it faster, but I really wasn't in a rush. But the interesting thing is that about this time, around, spring, summer of 2013, lots of other women had the same idea as me. I think that's really, really fascinating. It's like we were all on the same wavelength. So wanted to talk a little bit about stuff that I've learned so far. Because again, lots of people ask me, how to start a podcast, what to do. So stuff that I've learned so far, in case you're thinking about starting a podcast or doing any other type of guest blogging thing or video thing where you're going to be interviewing other people, because of course that's the format of my show. The vast majority of my episodes are interviews with other people. So first of all, set a schedule that you can keep. Now, my original idea was to release 2 episodes a month because I thought that would be manageable. But once I started interviewing people, I realized how much I loved interviewing people. Absolutely loved it. And so even before I launched the podcast, I decided I was going to change my schedule and submit a weekly episode. And that seemed like that was doable as well. And it has been. I mean, now we're on episode 100. I've interviewed, well, not 99 people because I've done some solo episodes, but it's been totally manageable. But the thing is, if you're going to do any kind of podcast, radio show, interview show, whatever, where you're working with other people, you really, really need to plan in advance. And that's because it takes time to get people booked. Every couple of weeks, I send out at least 4 or 5 invites to different people that I'm interested in interviewing. Now, sometimes you get a no. That really has actually happened to me. I think I've only had 2 people say no to me out of all the people that I've asked. So sometimes you get a no. So not all of those invites that you send out are going to come back in terms of people booking into your calendar to be interviewed by you. Sometimes people take forever to reply because they're busy with their own business stuff. If you're interviewing other women entrepreneurs or whoever the heck it is that you're interviewing, people are busy. They've got stuff going on. Not everyone replies, immediately to their emails. Sometimes people have a launch coming up and they just, don't have time to book in anything extra. People have other things going on. So sometimes it can take quite a while to get people booked into your calendar. Some people have, immediately said yes to me, but then it's taken months to actually get the interview into the calendar. So you really need to plan in advance and invite far more people than you actually need to interview in your schedule. And another thing that I wanted to bring up is only interview people that you're really excited about. Jessica Kupferman was talking about this the other day on one of the She podcast episodes, something about how she wasn't, really jazzed about all the people that had been pitching her or something like that. And yes, I totally agree with her because I only interview people that I'm really excited about. The vast majority of the women that I've interviewed on this podcast have been women that I've approached. I would say, 95%. Occasionally I get pitched by people. Sometimes I, check them out and I feel like it's a really good fit. Sometimes it doesn't seem like a good fit. Sometimes I'm not quite sure. And then I kind of have to follow them on social media for a while until I get to know them. And then I can, get a clear idea of whether they're right or not. But the important thing is that I've only interviewed people that I really, really love. I love what they do. I love how they do it. And they're people that I'm really excited to talk to and get to know and share their story with you, my listeners. I don't think it would be fair to you as my listeners to interview someone if I weren't really, jazzed about them. So that's a really big thing for me. I do not say yes to everyone, and that's how it is. So other things that I've learned is in the beginning, I would just send out an email, and I've got all these standard emails. So I've got, I think 3 standard emails. I've got one standard email to invite people. I've got a second standard email, which I've made into a PDF, which tells people what the interview is like and what they can expect. And then I've got my third email for when it goes live, which is very simple. It just kind of includes the date for, the date that it's gone out and the link to the show notes so that people can share that link. What I did was I realized, and it was after, I don't know what episode it was. It must have been episode 20 or thereabouts. Someone kind of felt stuck with a question that I asked them, and I thought, I feel like this person wasn't prepared. So don't assume that people know how to be interviewed. Lots of the women that I have interviewed for my podcast have experience being interviewed, either on video or on audio or written interviews. Some of them didn't. Some of the people, it was their first time being interviewed. And there were a few women that said to me, I'm really nervous about this. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I always recommend to people to take Rescue Remedy if you're nervous about anything, because it's fantastic. And it really just kind of calms your jitters. I think for the first, 5 or 6, or maybe even more, maybe up to the first 10 interviews that I did, I was really, really nervous myself because I wasn't, I was new to interviewing people. I wasn't used to doing it. I didn't have a lot of experience. And I would always take my Rescue Remedy and I would kind of calm down and, get really focused on this person. I would do my kind of last minute research of the person right before the episode, just to really kind of get them in my head before we started talking. I had kind of a ritual going. Now I'm not nervous at all to interview people because it's something that I've done. I've done 99 episodes and most of those have been interviews. So it's something that I've kind of got down. But the important thing is that I created this really clear PDF with information for my guests on how the show usually goes. So it includes the best way to connect to Skype, and that's using a landline as opposed to Wi-Fi, because not everyone has fantastic internet quality. And of course, if people don't have good internet service provider, they're not going to have really clear sound for the Skype call. Sometimes I've had dropped calls on Skype during the interview, and then we kind of have to go backtrack, and kind of redo the last question. So it's best to set people up in advance with best ways to connect to Skype, general questions that I ask. I mean, I've got some general guidelines of questions that I usually ask, which if you've listened to this podcast before, I always ask people about, their background, their business journey, how they got to where they are today. Sometimes I ask, what are the biggest challenges that you overcome in business? I've got a couple of questions that I don't always ask, which are, did you experience any fears or blocks come up as you built your business? How did you get past those fears? Was there a tipping point in your business when things went from struggle to flow? And what do you think contributed to that? What are your top tips on whatever your thing is, whatever the topic of the interview is that I'm interviewing people on? Do you have any women business mentors? Are there any women in business who inspire you? How can other women in business benefit from working with you? And of course, where people can find you online. So those are my basic questions. But of course, I change the questions depending on who I'm speaking with, because I'm constantly asking people to expand on things that they've shared with us, kind of dig deeper into the information, stuff that they've shared. So it's very fluid and it's very conversational. That's my style. Everyone has, kind of a different interview style. Some people just have set questions and they just ask those questions and that's it. But I find it more interesting for the interview to be kind of organic and, dig deeper into details that I find interesting or things that might be useful to you as a listener. One thing that I've learned is to have really clear standards as far as sound and background noise. Now, this is something I mention in my PDF. I ask people to turn off their phones. I also turn off my home phone, my landline. Ask people to be in a quiet place where they won't be disturbed. But people don't always pay attention to that. I had one episode that I couldn't even air because there were a lot of dogs barking in the background, and the dog just did not stop barking. And it ended up being the worst episode ever because I was distracted by the noise. It was just throwing me off. I wasn't asking good questions. The interview was just horrible from my perspective. I mean, I was just not doing a good job. And I listened to it once I'd finished recording and I just couldn't bring myself to release it. And so I asked my podcast editor, what do you think? And he said, no, you absolutely cannot release this. So, I didn't. So what I could have done in retrospect is the second that dog started barking and I realized that he wasn't going to stop, just say, look, let's reschedule for another time when this noise won't, when the dog will be, outside or distracted or, quiet or whatever. So that's one thing that I've learned is to have really clear standards. I had another guest who was walking a lot and moving a lot because that's how she likes to think. And, I totally get that, but there's a lot of background noise in that episode. And it was just a result of, the microphone moving around and that kind of thing. So again, in retrospect, I probably would have stopped the person and said, hey, can you relax and sit down? And, I know you think better when you're moving, but there's a lot of background noise in that. So having clear standards is really, really important. And those are two problems that I've had over the course of, 99 episodes. So that's not that bad. But I've heard really, horror stories from other podcast hosts. I remember that on this one, I think it was in the She Podcasts Facebook group, someone said something about how she once had a guest who she was interviewing and a toilet flushed in the middle of the interview. And wow, some people just don't know that you shouldn't be in the toilet when you're being interviewed. I mean, maybe it was the toilet, next door to her office. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't the person that was being interviewed, but try to have clear standards for noise and sound, both in your home or wherever it is that you're interviewing, and hold your guests up to the same high standards, because otherwise it's really annoying for your listeners. If any of you have listened to, that one episode that I mentioned where there was, background noise from the guests moving around, you might have found that annoying. I know I do have one review on iTunes. I can't remember where it is, but someone said that the sound quality wasn't very good. And I tend to be really, really careful about the sound quality of these episodes, with the two exceptions of those guests who had some background noise going on. So, more things that I've learned so far from interviewing people. It's a lot like coaching. And since I've trained as a coach and I've got lots of experience coaching, this actually comes easy for me. And I really think that one of the reasons that people often say to me that I'm a great interviewer is because of my coaching experience. So start out by creating a rapport at the beginning of the call. So before I even press record on my call recorder for Skype, I've had like a quick little chat with my guest. How are you doing? How are things going today? Did you read my PDF? Do you have any questions? Do you know what to expect? That kind of thing. Just quick little chat, check in, have a little laugh, create that rapport, and it really makes the interview flow so much better. Next is to be genuinely curious. As I said, I don't interview people that I'm not really, really excited to interview and to have a conversation with. And so when they bring things up that, I find interesting, I am genuinely curious and I ask them, some follow-up questions around those things because I want to know more. And the things that I think that you might find interesting as well. I also take notes as I'm listening because I find it the easiest way for me to kind of get clear on what my next questions are going to be. And this is one of the things that I find most challenging, not only about interviewing someone for this podcast, but also for coaching and things like that. Because you've got to be actively listening to this person, but you've also got to be thinking about what your next question is going to be. Otherwise, when they get to the end of their topic that they're talking about, you're going to be going, yeah, next question. So it's really trained my brain to work in very interesting ways because I've got to be focused, super focused on not only what's being said, but what I want to ask next. So if you're a coach, this might come easy. It probably will, if you've got the experience. But it is something challenging for people that either aren't used to coaching or working with clients in that way and aren't used to interviewing people. Another thing that's really important is to just do what you love. Whether you want to interview people, whether you want to have a solo show, figure out what format you like and just do that part of the show that you love. Outsource all the rest. So the audio editing, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to outsource, and I found my podcast editor from, the start. From the moment I started looking into what needed to be done to release a podcast, I started Googling how to do audio editing, and I realized I had absolutely no desire to teach myself how to do this because it just didn't look like something that would be fun to me. And I know that there are plenty of other people out there that like doing those things. So found my editor. He's been doing the entire show from episode 1 to today and will be doing on into the future. And I've actually asked him to expand his role. I think it was this year. So one of the things that he does is he tags the podcast episodes with the metadata. He writes up the show notes, sets that up in my website. He uploads the file to Libsyn, schedules a post to go out on Facebook, that kind of thing. And what I realized in the beginning, I did this all for like the first, probably 60 or 75 episodes. And I really got to the point where I really didn't like doing the show notes or the tagging or the uploading and all that. And so I asked him if he could help with that. And it's really made me love my podcast so much more because I'm just doing the bits that I love. I'm either doing a solo show or I'm doing an interview with someone, and he can do the rest. And this is stuff that he's good at, and he can probably do it a lot more quickly and easily than I can because that's his thing. So, do what you love and outsource the rest. This will really help you stick with your podcast because a lot of podcasts don't last very long. So, what are my top tips for starting a podcast? I wanted to talk a little bit about this because this is a question that I get all the time. Lots of people are asking me how to start a podcast. Like, how do they do this? I've had a couple of Skype sessions with people or just conversations offline even with people who want to start a podcast and want to know what to do. So my top tips are always the same. Read the John Lee Dumas book. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's really, really inexpensive. It's like under $5 or £5 on Amazon. It's really, really good. And it comes up with Podcast Launch, right? So it's called Podcast Launch, a complete guide to launching your podcast with 15 video tutorials. How to create, launch, grow, and monetize a podcast. So on Amazon UK, it's £2.99 for the paperback. Wow. Okay. So it's really, really inexpensive. There's no excuse, like you have no excuse not to get this, because it's really, really, really useful. The video tutorials are useful. The book you can read, just in one sitting, and it will give you all the basic information you need on how to start a podcast. So if you've ever thought that starting a podcast might be for you, start out with the John Lee Dumas book, Podcast Launch. Next, I highly recommend joining the She Podcasts Facebook group. And this is a Facebook group that's related to the She Podcasts podcast. And it's full of women podcasters, some of whom are very experienced, some of whom are just starting up, and you can ask all of your questions there. So if there are any questions you have left over after reading the John Lee Dumas book and watching his 15 free video tutorials, this is where you need to go. Great community, great women. I really, really like it. And following on from that, my next tip is to listen to the She Podcasts podcast. It's got great co-hosts, Elsie Escobar and Jessica Kupferman. Jessica's actually been a guest on this podcast, so you might know her from there. And Elsie hopefully will be a guest very soon. I've approached her about that, and she said yes. So hopefully we'll have her talking about podcasting. Elsie's been podcasting for like 9 years, which is crazy long. So these are two really dynamic women who have great conversations about podcasting, and you can learn a lot there. Next, you want to listen to a variety of other podcasts to see what you want yours to be like. See what you like, see what you don't like, see what you want to do, see what you definitely do not want to do. And that's really, really useful. So, as I said, the first podcast that I ever listened to was Natalie Sisson's Suitcase Entrepreneur. I highly recommend her podcast. Check her out and see if you like her format. She does interviews most of the time, and then she does a Fresh in 15 episode, which is kind of her second episode each week that she does. So she does an interview and a solo. Finally, if taking a class is how you learn best, take a podcasting course. Podcasting School for Women is run by Elsie and Jessica from She Podcasts. And if you go to their website or to the Facebook group, you can find out about it there. I know it just recently launched this current round of it, so it might be a while before you can sign up for it again. But do check that out. And I know there are other podcasting schools out there, but this is one that I recommend just because I love what Elsie and Jessica do. And it's Podcasting School for Women. So I think those are my main top tips that I have for, just getting started in a podcast. I wanted to cover really quickly top mistakes that people make when they start a podcast. And I think some of these things are reasons that people don't do very well or get burnt out or just don't stick with it and, quit. Lots of podcasts quit after a few episodes. So if you want this to be a long-term thing for you, there's some things that you need to plan in advance. So you need to have a clear topic. Like what are you going to be podcasting about? So I'm interviewing women entrepreneurs because that's what I wanted and I couldn't find. You need to have a clear purpose or reason for your show. I think my purpose or reason has expanded over the years, but my starting purpose was to create this show that I really wanted to listen to, and I couldn't because there weren't any podcasts that were just interviewing women entrepreneurs. Now, I have so many reasons for continuing with my podcast. I love interviewing people. I absolutely love it. I find it so, so interesting, and I find it a really great way to meet new people and to expand my network and to get to know new people and to get to know people better. And to have conversations with women that I, maybe follow online and social media and, want to get to know them. And people that I want to share with you because I want to be providing really useful content to you as my listener. I want to provide you with a variety of topics that you're going to be interested in and find useful and people that you're going to be inspired by. So those are kind of my reasons for continuing this show after 99 and now 100 episodes. You want to be really clear on who your listeners are. So my listeners are mostly heart-centered women entrepreneurs or purpose-driven women entrepreneurs, women solopreneurs. So get clear on who your listeners are because you want to be able to market your podcast to these people. You want to include calls to action. So often I will ask people to review the podcast. If I'm doing a solo show that's around a topic, I'll invite you to either sign up for a free session with me or sign up to a course I'm running or a program or other things. So if you want people to take action, you need to ask them to take action. I know you know that probably from blogging, but that applies to podcasts as well. You need to get a real podcast host like Libsyn. Libsyn is short for Liberated Syndication. I think it's one of the first podcast hosts, and it's been around forever. And it's very reliable, and it gives you great statistics as well. So what I do is I upload my files, or actually my podcast guy uploads the files to Libsyn, and from there it syndicates out to Stitcher and to iTunes. And so you don't need to upload your podcast everywhere. You need to watch out for low quality sound. So I've got a Zoom H2N microphone that I bought a couple of years ago for my first online course that I was running, and it's fantastic because I use it now for the podcast. So this gives me great sound. I encourage my guests to use external mic as well, and also use headphones so that we don't have that kind of weird echo that you get when you're not using headphones on Skype. And then finally, don't expect instant success. Like starting a new website or a new blog or a new channel on YouTube or whatever. It takes time to build a following of listeners. Just, keep going, keep producing great content, and it will grow little by little. And I think a lot of people expect, they're going to launch their podcast and it's going to get into New and Noteworthy and it will just explode and they'll have thousands of listeners every week. It takes time to grow. So, don't get discouraged if it's not an instant success, because most podcasts aren't. So, I don't know. It's hard. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do a recap of all the episodes. Would take a while because there's been 99. And I was afraid to call out, just a handful of episodes because, I love them all. Like I said, all the women that I've interviewed here, I really love them all. And I think that they've provided great content for me and for you and for the podcast. And it's been an honor to have every single one of my guests on the show. I love them all, and I would love to have them all back. But I just wanted to call out a few in case you hadn't listened to them. Marianne Cantwell was in the first year. She is the author of... we talked about how to be a free-range human. She's an author of a book on that topic, how to quit your job and start your own business and do your own thing. Kate Swoboda, also known as Kate Courageous, she was on in the first year as well, talking about how to live a courageous life. I absolutely love her. I love what she does. And in some ways, she was also kind of an inspiration for starting this podcast, because I remember years ago reading on her website about how she talked about how one of the most important ways or most important things that she did to build her business was interviewing other people. And that always kind of stuck in my head, and I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. And then it ended up materializing as this podcast a couple of years ago. We had Dr. Joanna Martin on talking about how to embrace the feminine way to wealth. That was a great episode. I love Joanna. Celestine Chua was on. She was episode 27, talking about how to build a successful business around your blog. She's someone that I've been following for, probably since 2009, 2010. So it was really fantastic to have a conversation with her about how she's built her very, very successful blog. Allison Green from Ask a Manager, she talked about how to manage your team. She was episode 37. Really, really fantastic interview. Loved that so much. I really had to control myself not to fangirl on her because I really, really love her and her really super blog. It's called askamanager.org, I think it is. Fantastic. Really good episode. So... who else? Natalie Sisson, of course. She was episode 51. She talked about how to have freedom in business and adventure in life. Love Natalie Sisson, the Suitcase Entrepreneur. If you don't listen to her podcast, do check her out. And it was such a great thing to have Natalie on the show as episode 51, because it was like my show kind of coming full circle in a way, because she was my inspiration for this podcast. And then later this year, I was also a guest on her podcast as well. So that was absolutely fantastic. Really, really love that. Let's see, Laura Roeder, we talked about how to hire your first project manager and why you need one for your business. Let's see, who else do we have? Natalie McNeil. She has also written a book. We talked about how to conquer your world, and that will make more sense if you listen to the episode. That's episode 71. That was a really great chat with Natalie. I love her videos, love her business. Let's see, who else do we have? Flora Bowley was fantastic. We talked about how to follow your creative intuition. Flora is an artist, and she teaches people how to tap into that kind of creative intuition and paint. I love what she does. She's also an author. She's got a great book out. Joanna Penn was really exciting. She talked about how to make a living with your writing. She's also someone that I've been following probably since, I don't know how many years I've been reading her blog, but she's fantastic. So if you're even thinking about becoming an author or self-publishing books, definitely listen to that episode, which was 85. Denise Duffield Thomas, one of my top favorite women entrepreneurs. We talked about how to overcome your money blocks in episode 90, which was absolutely fabulous. So, that's a quick recap of, just a few of the fantastic episodes we've had. Kate Northrup was also on recently, talking about money stuff. That was another really, really good episode. So, highly recommend that you kind of go through the list. Check out some of the previous episodes if you haven't already. You can find those on Stitcher. You can find them on iTunes. If you want to go to my website and find them, the direct link is readytobloom.com, and that's bloom.com /R2B podcast. And that's readytobloom.com /R2B podcast. And that's it. So you can find all the episodes there as well. So I just want to give a quick shout out to the latest reviews. It's been a while since I've done this, so these reviews are quite old, and I'm not sure if I've already given a shout out to them or not. So just in case, I wanted to say thanks to Winky Wonder, who says, as a small business owner, I'm always looking for great resources that teach me and don't waste my time with the same old stuff. Holly's show is that. Lots of new, useful info exactly for small business owning women like me. And Natalia Real, who's also a recent guest on the show, says Holly knows her stuff. Holly Worton is a marketing expert and continues to bring in experts from other fields. You'll always come away with something from these podcasts. So those are the latest, except I think they're not so recent reviews, but I think I haven't given them a shout out, so there you go. I also wanted to take a second to ask you for reviews. If you could please take 2 minutes and leave a rating and review on iTunes, that would mean so much to me. I have so many women that come up to me in real life when I'm going to events and they say, oh, I love your podcast. It's my new favorite. I love it so much. I listen to it all the time. And I think that they haven't taken the time to do an iTunes review. And I always ask people to, just because it's really, really important, because it really helps this show get out there. So wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for being, a regular listener. Thank you so much for tuning into these episodes every week. Thank you for sticking with me throughout these 100 episodes and, listening in. I really, really appreciate it. And if you could just take a minute or 2 minutes and leave a rating or review on iTunes, I would really, really appreciate that. It's really easy. And if you go to that link I gave you before, readytobloom.com /R2B podcast, there's a tutorial there that you can link to on how to do a rating and review on iTunes if you don't already know. And if you could also please just share the episodes on social media, on either Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, whatever. I pin every episode on Pinterest. I share them on the Ready to Bloom Facebook page and also on my personal profile. I tweet them out on Twitter. So if you could just please retweet, repin, repost on Facebook, that would mean so much to me, and it would really help get new listeners to the show, which I would love. So my plans for the future, really, really quickly. I'm planning to continue with my weekly episodes because this feels like a really good pace for me. I've managed to keep it up for 100 episodes. And I'm going to start aiming for one solo episode per month. This may or may not be feasible because I'm just not naturally a chatty person. And it's not easy for me to sit here and talk by myself for 30 minutes. So I may or may not do that, but I was doing that a lot when my business was focused on social media, and I really, really liked it. So I'm going to consider aiming for one solo episode a month. I'm also thinking about bringing on a co-host for once a month. There are a couple of really talented other women podcasters that I've got in mind, and I'm thinking about reaching out to one of them to bring them on to be a co-host just once a month, so we can have a chat, the two of us, and you can get kind of two different perspectives on, popular business topic that may be of interest to you. So let me know what you think about that. I would love to have feedback. So if you want to email me, my email is holly@readytobloom.com. And again, that's bloom.com. I would love to hear from you. Either tweet to me, send me a link or a comment or a message on Facebook. I would love that. Or email me. I love, getting emails and hearing from you. Really, really useful for me to hear from you, to see, what's most useful for you and what do you most want to hear on this podcast. Also wanted to ask you for feedback via a survey. So I've got a survey you can find at readytobloom.com/survey. And the basic questions are, what would make it easier for you to listen? For some people, they know how to sign up on iTunes or Stitcher, and they know how to listen to the podcast. But, maybe you would find it more useful to be able to sign up and receive a link to download the files directly. Would that make it easier? I don't know. Let me know what would make it easier for you to listen in. What topics would you like to see featured that haven't been covered? What guests would you like to listen to on this podcast? I would love to hear from you and get, ideas for what you want. Because up until now, I've been basing this on, a variety of women that I find really interesting. But I would love to hear from you on who you want to see. I'd also like to know what length is best for you. Most episodes have been 30 minutes long. Some of them have stretched out to 45 minutes long. But other podcasts come in all lengths. Would you like a 15-minute podcast, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, 60 minutes? Let me know what is best for you, what you like, what you find most useful. And so again, that survey link is readytobloom.com/survey. That's ready, the number 2, bloom.com/survey. So I hope you found this episode interesting. I was really struggling with what to do for episode 100 because I wanted to do something special, wanted to do something different. But in the end, I thought it would be most useful to you or interesting to just do a quick little recap, talk about things that I've learned, talk about how you can start your own podcast, because I've been getting the question a lot. And again, thank you so much for listening. I really cannot thank you enough. I check my stats, not that often, but every month or so. And I love seeing the numbers grow consistently. I would love to ask you for a little bit of help in, just spreading the word and helping other people join this podcast and listen and get, useful information and inspiration that you can get from these guests. So again, thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to seeing you. Next week, we're going to be back with a regular interview episode, and I will look forward to seeing you then. So thank you so much for listening, and remember to visit readytobloom.com/100 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to the Ready to Bloom podcast with your host, Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's guests, including links for topics that were discussed at readytobloom.com. That's ready, the number 2, bloom.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to head over to iTunes and leave us a quick review of this podcast. Thank you so much.